Thank you all for joining. So my name is Simon Manelli, and I'm the Director of Research, Technical Services, and Industry Programs for the Canadian Urban Transit Association, also known to many as CUTA. So thanks everyone for joining. This session is on low carbon mobility, more specifically on transit on demand and as a way of reducing greenhouse gases. So I think this is a really interesting topic. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists. And we're going to learn a little bit about how to develop on-demand service into shared mobility that reduces greenhouse gases. Now, it's a complicated thing to do. We have a lot of different components. To this. So we have, how do we plan for this? How do we schedule? And how do we operate this? And there's a lot of different models and a lot of different ways to do this that you can see across the board in Canada, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the US as well. So I'm excited to hear a bit more about this. And one component I think we're going to hear a lot about is how we can harness new technology and a lot of these new operational models that are coming out in order to achieve this. So I'm really excited for this, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. I'll give our panelists a bit of an introduction. So first, we have Ariane Van Andel, who's with Transit Partnerships for Uber Transit. Hello, Ariane. I'll give him a chance to turn on his video so we can get a look.
Yes.
Hello. We also have Hamish Campbell, who's the country manager for Canada for Via On Demand Transit. Hello, Hamish.
Morning, everyone.
Morning. And lastly, we have Paul Buck, who's the manager of transit services for Belleville Transit. Hi, Paul. Great. I'm really excited for this panel. I think it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. There's a lot of different ways we can think about on-demand transit. And when you add reducing greenhouse gases to this, I think it adds kind of an interesting element to it, where you're now thinking about things like, how can we maybe reduce personal car ownership and different things. I won't take anything away from anybody's presentation, but yeah, I think it's really interesting. So let's get into the presentation. And I believe we'll start with Paul Buck. So Paul, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, thank you, Simon, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be able to be here today and to be able to present the situation that the city of Belleville finds itself in with our on-demand transit service, and how we've used it to assist the residents in the city of Belleville, but also by the same time help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and to provide a transit service. For a little bit of reference, a bit of background on the city of Belleville. We are located on the north shore of Lake Ontario in the Bay of Quinte, almost halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, just off the 401 corridor. Our buses service just over 50,000 residents in the city of Belleville, covering 248 square kilometers. Pre-COVID, our buses operated 1.1 million kilometers in a year, operating 57,000 service hours, and carried just over 1.1 million passengers in 2019. In 2020, our ridership dropped, same as everybody's, but ours dropped to 630,000 passengers in 2019. Our fleet consists of 17 40-foot low-floor conventional transit buses and 3 paratransit door-to-door mobility service vehicles. So on September 17th, 2018, Belleville Transit launched an on-demand transit service for our evening service. And we had that service operating as a full on-demand service in March 2020 when the COVID-19 lockdown started, fully on demand. Now, the benefit we found with the on-demand service, and the reason we went with on-demand initially, was that we had a late-night service that we were operating, but the ridership was not sufficient to provide enough demand for a regularly scheduled service. So rather than run 9 fixed route service routes to carry, at the time, was only 46 passengers, we started looking at options to provide a less expensive but just as convenient service that would attract riders to the nighttime service. And we launched our on-demand service. That allowed us to operate 3 buses to cover the entire city from 9:30 at night until midnight on weeknights, and weekends is from 6:30 until midnight. Utilizing the buses that we had, we didn't purchase any new equipment. We utilized our own infrastructure, utilizing the bus stops that we already had in place, and collecting regular transit fares. The additional hardware that was required to operate our on-demand service were LTE tablets that were equipped for each vehicle. So like I was saying, the demand, why on-demand service, was based on our ridership demand. We knew we had a reduced ridership request in the evening service hours, but we still had to cover the entire city because the service was initiated to predominantly move our shift workers to and from our industrial park in the northeast corner of Belleville to residences and locations where they wanted to go all over Belleville. So having a reduced fixed rate service was inconvenient and was not ideal. So we had to provide as much service to the city area as we could, maintaining a budget and monitoring costs and considerations to our overall budget. During the COVID-19 pandemic last year, when it hit, like everybody else, our transit service dropped by 94%. Our ridership demand dropped by 94%. And we initially started to reach out to the essential workers, employers in the area. We have a number of food service companies in our industrial park. We have a regional hospital and a number of senior residences that we knew we had to get employees back and forth to cover their shifts as essential workers. And we also had to still provide some service to our public to ensure that they could get to doctor's appointments, get groceries purchased, and still be able to get around the city in a reduced manner as they had. Also at this time, like everyone else, we also switched to rear door boarding and ceased collection of fares in order to protect our drivers from the risk of infection or contact. So the service that we had to provide, we knew we needed to operate as economically as possible, because also this time we were unsure if there was going to be any sort of a cost recovery coming from the province or from the federal government. So we immediately switched to our on-demand service. The benefit to switching to on-demand was that we had a reduced number of vehicles on the road, reduced fuel usage, reduced wear and tear, and obviously a reduced impact on the environment. So we got to compare our regular service to a fully on-demand service operating in the city of Belleville. So our regular service, we operated a total of 27 buses or peak units per day on a weekday, with a total of 159 bus units in a week. And we traveled just under 4,000 kilometers on a weekday, or in total, just over 23,000 kilometers in a week. In our operating hours, 233 hours per day, or just over 1,300 hours per week. In operating that service, we were generating 2.42 metric tons of CO2 per week, which would have extrapolated out to 125.84 metric tons of CO2 per year. When we switched our service entirely to on-demand, we were able to see a significant reduction in the number of vehicles being used in total. We dropped to a total of 11 units per day through a weekday, or 67 total bus units in a week. Our kilometers dropped to just over 9,500 kilometers a week, and our operating hours dropped to just over 498 service hours in a week. That's roughly almost a 60% reduction across the board in vehicle hours, or vehicles per day, kilometers driven per day, and total service hours in a day. And by switching completely on demand, our transit service in Belleville created or dropped to 0.99 metric tons of CO2 per week, or just over 51 metric tons per year. And we take that into a head-to-head comparison. You can see that the sustained on-demand transit in Belleville, we would be able to reduce our CO2 emissions by 59% per year just by switching to on-demand service. Now, recognizing, of course, that on-demand service requires a reduced ridership in some areas in our city. As we start to ramp up our service, in particular in Belleville, our service to the college, our service to the shopping center or shopping district of the city, demand that we have a scheduled fixed route service. It's the demand is there, that it's too difficult to schedule on demand for those, so we have to schedule a fixed route service. So what we're looking at now is utilizing on-demand service to service the neighborhood areas and bring the individuals or passengers out to a fixed line run to our heavier core service. And of course, as we move forward with the reduction of carbon fuel vehicles to zero emissions vehicles, these numbers are only going to get better. That concludes my presentation today. I thank you all very, very much. If there are any additional questions in regards to our use of on-demand, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is there on the screen. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. It's such a positive story, and I love seeing those greenhouse gas emissions numbers and the comparison. So thank you. So up next, we will all introduce or bring up Ariane Van Andel from Uber.
Make sure it's all working. Can you hear me, Simon?
I can, yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to give a brief presentation about what Uber can contribute to reducing the greenhouse gases for transportation in Canada. So this presentation will give some overview and some opportunities that we see in reducing those greenhouse gases. So first, for those that are not so familiar with Uber in Canada, as Uber, we started in 2012 as a ride-sharing platform. And currently, the app also shows public transit options for public transportation services in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. We also make our software platform available for transportation providers. And also, Uber provides like Uber Eats to connect people with meals, groceries, and other essential items. We also have Uber Freight. And last year, Uber incorporated an organization called Route Match that has already several deployments in on-demand and accessible transportation in Canada. I will be focusing in this presentation on the public transportation aspect and, of course, on the emissions and reducing those in Canada as well. So just to give people an understanding about what it is that we can provide, is basically what we're saying. We can assist the municipalities and the transit systems to provide an ecosystem that is inclusive for all modes of transportation. So the Uber solutions are designed to complement the existing transit network and aim to attract more people to the public transit network while reducing the dependence on the private car. As you can see it on the slide on the top, I added also a short indication about like ridership per vehicle revenue hour to kind of give an idea about when does it make sense. I think for the high capacity services, as you can see on the right top, we can provide like integrated trip planning for all the services already in place. This means that all the transit services are directly visible in the Uber app for trip planning. It can also be easily expanded with fare payment options. But when the bus services are not as efficient, as we also saw in the presentation from Paul earlier, it makes more sense to operate like microtransit services or mobility on demand services. And for this, we can provide a technology platform. So the Uber technology can be used for the drivers and for their own vehicles, as well as for the travelers, to make sure that you can put an on-demand service in place. And then lastly, as we can see in the green box here, is that when even the on-demand services are becoming too expensive or not effective, maybe because you have to drive out just for one person, or maybe it's in hours of service that the demand is just very low, we can also provide complementary Uber rides for the first and the last mile for late night services. And that is also the service how most people really know Uber, and this is also the concept that some people might be aware of as being implemented in the town of Innisfil, close to Toronto. Let's see the next slide here. So if we focus now on the emissions, for sustainability, we have a commitment to be at zero emissions in 2030 in North America and 2040 globally. For certain cities in the world, we even commit to being at zero emissions by 2025. That is a process that we do in cooperation with these cities. And the way how we would want to get there is basically by, let me see, sorry about that. The slides go too fast. By 4 key actions. And what those 4 key actions mean is the first key action is expand to Uber Green. And that basically means that we provide and promote zero emissions vehicles for Uber rides. This is an initiative that is actually leading in Canada across the world. So the Canadian cities like Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver are cities with higher percentages of already Uber green vehicles. And Uber is also assisting in, for example, getting more charging points in place so that Uber green vehicles, but also general non-emission vehicles can be implemented and drive around in the cities. The second step that we're doing is investing in multimodal. That basically means that we provide an opportunity in the Uber app to book a first mile plus transit, which basically makes the trip more affordable. As you can see in the example, a 41 trip at a long distance becomes an $18 trip and connects directly to transit. The result, of course, of this is that the trip times are shorter, that the cost of travel are lower, and that there will be more shared kilometers in the network, which also will lead to fewer emissions over the entire network. The third step, what we're focusing on, is investing $800 million over the next 5 years to make sure that drivers go electric. And the last step is to make sure that we also provide insights in the results and where we currently are with emissions, so that people understand like what it is that we're aiming for and what it is where we are today. As on the last slide to conclude with this, is just to make sure that we're all working together. Is basically I would like to let everyone know, of course, that it is our goal to provide like an integrated transportation services so that we can build back with multimodal services that is integrated to the transportation network, and also with a flexible service model so that you can provide services basically to everyone, everywhere, 24/7 with wait times of less than 15 minutes. And of course, the goal is to make sure that this is going to be at zero emissions as soon as possible. So with this, I would like to thank everyone for their time, and thank you all for this opportunity, of course, to let me join this panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Arjen, and I really appreciate laying out all the different options. It gives you a good idea of like the different spectrum of ways you can tackle this and think about this. So thank you. Okay, and our third speaker will go to Hamish Campbell from Via On Demand Transit.
Thanks, Simon.
Great, thank you.
So good morning, everyone. My name's Hamish. I took a little bit of a different flavor this morning in the spirit of this post-COVID challenge that a lot of agencies are facing with ridership, and one of the best ways we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I think, just broadly, is to attract riders back to transit. So what I'm going to be talking about this morning is our experience through the pandemic, with some examples from Canada and around the world of really how on-demand transit and how technology is helping attract back riders and inherently reduce greenhouse gas emissions more broadly. So I want to just start by putting on-demand transit and this technology revolution that my colleagues spoke about as well into a bit of context, I think this macro trend towards digital transportation or digital mobility is broad and goes beyond just transit, and is a secular trend that existed pre-COVID, and certainly COVID has accelerated this digital transformation. And it's very similar to what happened, at the turn of the 20th century with the Industrial Revolution. So, we firmly believe that the future is sort of ACEs acronym that everybody uses: autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. And VIA strongly believes that shared trips and shared vehicles is the key to our future. There's a number of things driving this. There's rapid urbanization. There's a huge challenge around climate change, as everybody in this audience knows. There's the shift to digital consumption of everything. And then there's also this challenge where there really is going to be an issue, we think, post-COVID, where ridership, and particularly peak period ridership, is going to change. And that's an area where we believe we can really support transit agencies to help them bring back riders and be more resilient going forward. So I'm sure many of you in the audience, certainly those in Ontario, have heard of microtransit or on-demand transit. Please don't get caught up in the various labels. There's macro transit that's been used as well. They're all, from our perspective, the same. They're dynamically routed buses or vehicles, and certainly across Canada, there's been a huge push. I'm going to talk about a few case studies from Canada around the world. VIA in Canada these days, we're approaching a dozen partnerships with agencies across the country. One of our earliest partnerships was with the city of Sault Ste Marie. So just to kind of walk you through what on-demand looks like and what the outcome has been. So this is what their fixed route network looks like on a typical evening. But there was just, similar to Paul and Belleville, during evenings and weekends, particularly in smaller communities, there is not really enough ridership to justify a broad fixed route network. So the Soo went to on-demand. We were able to provide the same level of coverage across the city as their 9-bus, 9-route fixed network with 8 buses. So they were able to take a bus off the road, and wait times went from a headways of 60 minutes down to only an average wait time of 11 minutes. It's using their existing fleet of 40-foot buses, and people request a ride through an app or by phone. In order to ease the transition, there was a comprehensive communications rollout with customers to make sure that they knew exactly what the change was going to be and how it was going to occur. So, any of these on-demand services, change management and communicating with customers is key to their success. And by the numbers, it's pretty impressive. So, every Sunday evening, the average wait time has improved. Average utilization is between 11 and 13 rides per hour, and they've been able to do that with one less bus. And the other thing that's been interesting is the ridership on the on-demand service has stayed relative. It's dropped a little bit relative to the pre-COVID numbers, but not nearly as much as the fixed route network at other times of the day. So it's a very attractive service for customers, and we can see that through the ridership experience. We're also in North Bay, so similar to the Soo, it's a mid-sized city in Ontario. They launched in January of this year, again, using their fleet of 40-foot buses. Again, they were able to take one bus off the road as compared to their fixed route network before going to on-demand. They were able to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled in the on-demand zone. So that's apples to apples. That's not including the one bus off the road, by 18%, and 70% fewer vehicles, because we went from 6 buses to 5. In Niagara region, we launched a service in August, and in this case, VIA is supplying the vehicles and drivers as well. So this is a full turnkey solution in partnership with the region with branded, professionally maintained vehicles. And in this case, it's a huge service area. It's 1,000 square kilometers. And the reason the region partnered with us here is there was no effective way to serve this part of the region with fixed route transit. The thing that's been really, really interesting is, it launched in August, and the increases in ridership month over month have continued, notwithstanding lockdowns and notwithstanding, the various openings and closures across the province. So, some of the anecdotes coming out of the service have been really great. Hearing about essential workers that have been able to get where they need to go, and the options were not available to them before the service became available. Elsewhere in the world, so Wilson, North Carolina, and Kent County in the UK. So in the case of Wilson, North Carolina, that service launched in September. It's again a medium-sized city. It had a fixed route bus system that we replaced entirely with the VIA solution. It was averaging around 55 rides a day before moving over to VIA. We're now averaging around about 400 rides a day. A huge swath of the ridership are seniors and unbanked riders and people with disabilities. It's been an incredible success story, and it just speaks to the attractiveness and effectiveness of these on-demand solutions. And then in the case of Kent County in the UK, so after COVID hit, ridership reductions were substantial. Similar to all the other case studies, we were able to take the wait time down from hourly headways to an average wait time of about 11 minutes. We took 3 vehicles off the road, and ridership doubled. So by the numbers, very, very impressive in every regard. And then in Jersey City, so believe it or not, this is across the river from Manhattan. But if you get out of this purple central zone into the blue, what we call outer zone, very limited fixed route transit in that area, and certainly not very attractive or effective for the residents in that area. So this was a service that was championed very much by the mayor in Jersey City. It launched in February, so just before COVID. And as you can see, the ridership growth has been incredible. So this is in an urbanized area. This has been during COVID. It's just been an incredible good news story all around. And the most interesting part is the folks who are using it. One are using it for daily activities like commuting and errands. The other thing that's been really interesting is the number of lower income and vulnerable people who are riding the service. So there are stories like this where folks were using ride hailing, just simply they didn't have other options. Transit wasn't an option for them, and now they have an option that meets their needs. So incredible news story, and certainly very different to the experience of some other transit agencies right now. One more and this is Transport for New South Wales in Australia. What you can see here is by the numbers, the on-demand, which is shown in blue, it is generally recovering better than all of their other modes across the board. So just a little bit about VIA. We are best known for on-demand public transit. We recently acquired Remix, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a strategic planning software. We also are very much in the paratransit and non-emergency medical transport space, school buses, and we have a transit consultancy as well. And we are growing rapidly around the world and are now in 26 countries. So just to sort of wrap up and sort of as a closing thought, this is from Daniel Sperling at UC Davis. Pooling and sharing is very much the solution to all of our problems. So traffic congestion, climate change, social equity, infrastructure costs. We really need to be focused on shared rides and shared trips and shared mobility. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much, Hamish. And it's great to see very tangible examples in the kind of outcomes that those can achieve. So thank you very much. So, all right, we have everyone back. Thanks to all our speakers for their presentations. I think they were really interesting to get different examples from slightly different approaches and slightly different perspectives that you can have on the same kind of topic. So I'll give Aryan a sec to get his camera back on. There we go. So, hi, Aryan. Welcome back, everybody. And we have a number of really interesting audience questions that came in. So I'll start with just one question before we get to those that I'd like to pose to all of you. So we'll go one by one. But what I'd like kind of to know is one big question that always comes up is, how do you properly integrate the on-demand service you're offering with other maybe on-demand mobility options that exist with transit operations. So I don't. Maybe we'll go to Paul. Like I guess what I'm. Oh, I lost Paul. Oh, we have him back. Okay. I guess what I'm looking to ask is, there might be on-demand services that already exist, maybe specialized transit services or something like that. And how do you look to integrate everything together? Did you look at anything like that or face any challenges in that area?
That's actually a direction that we're heading in now. In the Pantonian product that we use, the passengers can be recognized as a mobility passenger or ambulatory. And with our mobility passengers, they're going to have the ability to book by civic address or door to door. And our ambulatory passengers will be restricted to booking from bus stop to bus stop. So it's still going to integrate very, very well. But to minimize the number of stops that we have to make, we just push our ambulatory out to stops as opposed to their residents. So it's going to mesh very, very well.
Okay. And what about with your fixed route services? So I know you mentioned when you originally ran it was an evening service. So would there be a transition period, or how would you kind of manage that?
We have some of our mobility passengers that still, even with AODA compliant bus stops, still have that difficulty getting to regular conventional transit. So we operate both services still for those that require the ambulatory. So there's still currently two streams of service available.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I'll pose the same question just about how to integrate with any existing transit operations. I'll go to Aryan. You kind of covered that in your presentation, but maybe you can give us a little bit of detail on the nitty gritty that you have to work out when integrating those services.
Yeah, I think it's integrating those services is always complex, specifically if you start talking about accessible services with people with special needs or special assistance or special eligibility. So for that matter, what we did is that we incorporated the product from RouteMatch. RouteMatch is also installed, for example, at YRT, and we're working closely with them to basically make that platform from RouteMatch integrated in the Uber platform, so that the Uber technology basically is not able to drive like the general public services, as people already know, but that we can also incorporate the abilities and the assistant needs of all the riders, so that when people want to book their rides, they can basically see an option in their travel planning opportunities that matches their abilities. So if it's a person with special needs, he will get in the app automatically a special needs option presented. People with non-special needs, they don't. And for that matter, the fleets can then also be combined in certain cases. It's not always possible, of course. There's always people that need special assistance that can never be integrated all together in a completely common service. But I think, and what we see is that like 80% of accessible services riders, they have possibility to just use general public as well. So we see a great opportunity there to bringing that together. And of course, we also integrate that with the fixed route services in bringing people to the nearest bus station or the train station, so that people can basically use a combined trip as much as possible aligned with their abilities.
Great. Thank you, Aryan. It's really interesting. Okay, and I'll go to Hamish with the same question.
So I think the question was primarily around integration. So maybe 3 different ways to sort of think about that, and I'll touch on platform integration. So integrating with other payment and software platforms. I'll touch on integrating services together. So this word has been overused, and there are mixed feelings about it, but the commingling or blended travel between conventional and specialized, and I'll also talk about fixed rate integration. So certainly, integrating with other platforms and payment platforms and mass platforms, that is definitely something that is going to be critical, I think, to the success of this technology going forward. There's any number of mass platforms that are out there. Some of them are agency owned and sort of run. There's a number of third-party ones. We take sort of an open ecosystem approach. I really do think that it's going to be maybe messy is the wrong word, but I don't think there's going to be one unified platform out there. I think people like to access their mobility in different ways. So having these different platforms work together is going to be critical, and that goes for fare payment as well. In terms of blended travel and integrating service delivery together, a lot of agencies are either doing that in various ways or certainly looking at it. Paul and Aryan touched on this and gave some examples as well. One example locally in Canada that we launched a couple of months ago is with the city of St. Thomas. So we're powering the town's paratransit system, and on evenings and low period times or low ridership times, we're also enabling conventional customers to share those vehicles. And what it's enabled them to do is they didn't have the budget to provide conventional service on evenings or to certain areas of the town. And by allowing conventional customers to share spare capacity on the paratransit, they were able to offer or introduce service to new areas and additional times. So that's certainly something that's beneficial for the agency from an efficiency and cost perspective, and also for customers. And then fixed route transit, that is going to be critical to making these on-demand services work. In North Bay, so we've got an on-demand zone, and there's also an area where fixed route services continue to operate during the on-demand times. We provide trip planning and intermodal connections between vehicles. So integration is critical, but important to sort of define and really think about what we mean by integration.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I agree with you. I think different places are looking at on-demand for maybe slightly different reasons, right? Which is why you see different operating models, different ways to go about them. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, we'll get into some of the audience questions. I have one that I think is really interesting for both Aryan and Hamish about what the competitive landscape for data security in software on-demand platforms looks like. I think this is a really interesting topic, and one that, like, the more prevalent it gets, the more top of mind it will be for people. There's a lot of obviously trying to do everything right now, but obviously tech is new. There's a lot of stuff around data storage. What are the rules around privacy and different things like that. So I'll go to maybe we'll start with Aryan, since we'll give Hamish a break, and then we'll go back to Hamish.
Sure. I think this is a very good question. Of course, data security is top of mind for a lot of people, especially also in the field of privacy. So also for Uber, this is, of course, top importance, because we don't want to be coming in the news with data security or privacy breaches. So from a policy point of view, this is also like top priority. So what we're doing is we're working together with governments, provincial government and national government to make sure that we can provide like all the data security that meets or exceeds basically the requirements of the federal needs or the provincial laws. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of effort being put in, like how to deal with data security on itself. Of course, also the physical security of data centers. So it is definitely a point of a lot of importance and also time spent on. And what we're trying to do is, of course, making clear with everybody how we can meet or exceed those requirements. It's always difficult to say, like, even if data is in the US or in Canada, I think physically speaking, on the internet, it doesn't make as much of a difference anymore if the physical location is in Canada or in the US or anywhere else. It is more about like what measures are you taking to make sure that there's certain levels of access and integrity or not. And so we're working very, very diligently and making sure that we always are meeting the provincial and the federal levels. But at this time, I can confidently say that we're exceeding those requirements because of the fact that we are as sensitive to breaches from a policy point of view as I think as the government is. So we definitely don't want to have this happen. So even within our organization, there's a lot of effort being spent on that, even instructions to internal employees, how to make sure that these security levels are met. So yeah, I hope that responds to your question there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thank you for also touching on the issue of data being stored on where it's being stored, the location, because I think that's also top of mind. Every province has slightly different rules. I come from the tech industry as well, so I understand how complicated and stuff they can get. But I think it's important, that everyone here knows that that's top of mind and being thought of and that kind of thing. So yeah, thank you very much. We'll go to Hamish. Maybe you can give your perspective.
I think I would align myself with everything Arjen said. It's the same at VIA. Maybe to add, from a security perspective, that is absolutely, I think for almost every software company, number one thing of importance. There's all sorts of international standards like ISO 27001 and a few other ones that we certainly meet or exceed in every respect. From a privacy perspective and storage perspective, that's a really interesting one. So I read something the other day that this is something that is one of President Biden's top priorities because U.S. privacy law is very, very different to European privacy law. It's a GDPR. So and it's creating all sorts of challenges for cross-continental trade and business activities. So one of apparently the Biden administration's top priorities is trying to harmonize European privacy law with U.S. privacy law. And I think it'll be interesting to see what that means for Canada as well. Certainly a lot of our partners have indicated concerns about sort of privacy in the US and an importance placed on Canadian data storage. So we're in the process of setting up servers in Montreal with Amazon Web Services. Maybe even sort of a more nuanced piece of that is there's where the data is stored and then there's where it's accessed and processed. And that nuance is also something that is sort of interesting to unpack and discuss with agencies. I don't know. That's sort of my 2 cents on it. We could talk about it all day long.
Yes, really. Yes, of course. No, I appreciate those comments, and I think, it just helps to have everyone know that that's top of mind and what kind of thoughts you're going through. But I think that you could have a whole discussion just on that, right? And you could get really into the weeds of that stuff. So I appreciate those responses. Thank you. I'll switch gears a little bit and go to Paul for a slightly different question about if you saw complaints maybe from users when on demand, maybe from their perspective, translated into a service schedule reduction. So if you heard complaints that maybe, for me, I had this great setup and now it's all gone, right? Or any changes like that you heard from people.
Actually, surprisingly, when we went to on demand, a lot of our customers saw it as a service improvement. They no longer had to know what this fixed routing was. They no longer had to know what the schedule was. They just had the ability to pull out their phone, request the bus ASAP, and our average wait time was 9 minutes, and our average ride time was 12. So if you were transferring on our fixed route service across town, your trip before could have been an hour by the time you rode to the terminal and transferred to go back on another bus. But with on demand, the bus you get on was the bus you get off, and it was always working towards getting you to your destination. Ironically, our service complaints increased when we went back or started to progress back to our fixed route service, because people deemed that as a service reduction, because now their trip was double the length and twice the time to get there. So it was the exact opposite. And the benefit to being on demand is there's no fixed routing. So the customers don't know how many buses are out there. They only know that when they requested the bus, it was there in a timely manner and got them where they wanted to go. So we were able to adjust service as we saw it building the next day or same day, sometimes to make sure we achieved that service demand that was there. So it was the reverse of that, in fact.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And to me, it sounds like it speaks to the fact that you used the right, maybe the right model, and you figured out the right times to implement it and stuff, so that it really did meet people's needs better than what was there previously. So thank you. So maybe I'll put this one maybe to Hamish, because you gave some really good examples of different places where you implemented different things. Just asking about physical infrastructure. Do you have any thoughts on, like, did you have any examples where physical infrastructure was required? And then maybe for everyone else, what type of thought should be given to what type of physical infrastructure might be needed to implement some on-demand solutions?
So generally, you don't need any physical infrastructure as a starting point. So it's a cloud-based system generally. I think that's consistent with all on-demand service providers. There's a rider app generally where people request rides. There's a driver app that goes on board the vehicle. You do need tablets on board the vehicle, so in that sense, there's physical infrastructure or hardware on board the vehicle. But any standard iPad or Samsung tablet is totally fine. And then there's a backend tool, and that backend tool is where call center staff can handle phone-in bookings and that type of thing. So maybe in terms of physical infrastructure, a couple of thoughts. One of the things that often comes up in discussions, in the service design process and at launch, is whether or not to use physical bus stops, like just physical bus stops, or virtual bus stops. And by virtual bus stops, that increases the number of pickup and drop off points, or something in between. In the Canadian context in particular, there's a tendency towards only using existing bus stops because then you can ensure that they are AODA or accessibility, it meets accessibility legislation. And also there's something up here called winter. So we want to make sure that winter maintenance occurs at the pickup and drop off point. So that's a reality as well. Maybe the only other thought is, we have done kiosks at key terminal locations around the world where customers can book rides through a kiosk. But generally, you don't need much in the way of physical infrastructure at all.
No, I think that's great, and I think that's exactly like the considerations that I would think you need to make is about accessibility and different things like that. Let's go maybe back up to Paul for a question. Now that you've kind of rolled, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'd be curious to expand maybe a little bit. How do you see these services changing and maybe reintegrating and moving in parallel to other services as COVID kind of, I hate to say COVID ends because that's a awkward thing to say, but as you know, maybe some ridership returns, and I believe and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you did mention that you're expecting certain fixed route to come back and different things like that.
We are actually, much like Hamish was saying about the service in Sault Ste. Marie, our evening on-demand service was probably the least impacted by COVID out of all of our routing. And as that service has increased, we've actually adapted it. We now have 2 fixed routes on our evening service that are fed into and out of our on-demand service to streamline it, because we know at certain points of times of day, like when our industrial plants are getting out of work, our rides demand is such that we have to have a fixed route service there. Rather than have 300 requests for a bus all within 10 minutes, we just schedule the bus to be there. So it is adapting in very, very well. And with the on-demand, it is so adaptable and changeable to fit the requirements of the service that it's quite easy to do. We have the ability to prevent riders from booking an on-demand trip on a fixed route service. The service will automatically push them to the fixed route. You can take an on-demand to a fixed route and away from a fixed route, but not on the fixed route. So it's all controllable operationally, and just makes it a smoother and easier process for the customer.
Great, that's really promising. It sounds like you're using the flexibility of on-demand to the best of your advantage, right? Which is what you want to do ultimately. I'll go to Ariane for the next question. I'm really curious. I like this question a lot. Whether there are any plans to integrate driverless shuttles into the on-demand service that you offer in the future. Oh, I think you're muted, Ariane.
Let me unmute myself.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a large part of Uber was focused on driverless vehicles in the past, but also I have to say like that part is basically spun off. So the focus at Uber at this time, as much as I'm aware, is also more in the nearer term with on-demand vehicles that are still drivers, since driverless services are still some time out, but we're working together with other providers of doing these types of services. But integrating driverless services in on-demand, I personally can see that, of course, very well happening at certain places. We can just integrate with our trip planning and our trip booking. I don't think it will take large scale of services within the next, let's say, 5 years or so.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like that's kind of happening. Another group is kind of working on that, and then you'll look to integrate it when it's ready, right?
Honestly speaking, I'm not involved in those developments and discussions, so I cannot really well speak to it. I can just talk from personal experience and saying like my focus is just how can we integrate today with transit, and how can we make sure that people get back to transit in the near term, and that we can make sure that you can reach as many people as efficient and effective as possible in today's service, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay. I think this will likely be, our last question before we kind of start wrapping things up. But we'll see. I'll go to Hamish, and I think during one of your presentations you compared the different wait times, and I'm curious to know if that was obviously an average. So was there instances maybe of increased wait time? Like, was it a case where some went down a lot and some went up a lot, or kind of how did you see that the variance in that case, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the parameters that every agency needs to set is what is the maximum wait time that is allowable, so at least in our system. So most agencies, that's 20 minutes, some it's 30 minutes, in some cases it's even 60 minutes. And one of the things that we watch really, really closely is the standard deviation from the average wait time. So if we're seeing a high degree of variability from the average wait time. That's one of sort of our key performance metrics to make sure that we're either adding vehicles or supply to the network in certain cases to get that variability down. Because candidly, the variability is almost as important as the wait time. So less variable wait time of, say, 18 minutes might actually be more preferable and better for a customer than a highly variable wait time where the average is, say, 12 minutes. In our experience, the sweet spot is somewhere between 8 and 15 minutes, particularly in the on-demand transit world where it's not curb-to-curb service. You're typically walking a short distance, so that gives enough time to finish your Cheerios or do whatever you need to do before you get on the bus and walk down to the bus stop. So yeah, that's my ramble on wait times.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, because from a rider's perspective, I guess fear with on demand might be that what I'm losing from fixed route is predictability. I'm not saying that's the truth, right? But that could be the fear or the perception that they have. So I think that makes sense. You have those ranges, and you want to be able to show them that hey, we can stick within this, and it's not all over the place and that kind of thing. Okay, I think we might have time for another question. I'm not seeing a warning that we have to wrap things up quite yet. So maybe I'll ask Paul this question. So have you looked at, maybe you can, and I apologize if I missed this part of your presentation. What kind of technology, and I have this because I have a little bit of a follow-up, are you using to alert people and notify people of when their buses are available and that kind of thing in your case?
Under the on-demand with the app,
right.
Once the bus departs the stop prior to the customer's pickup, they get an alert through the app, and they can follow the bus in real time right through to their stop, so that they know that it's coming. And when they book the bus and they get the confirmation back, it will give them the anticipated arrival time.
Right. Have you considered any different options for maybe people who don't have access to an app or a phone or that kind of thing?
We still have the ability to book through the app, which is ideal for the customer because it gives them a lot more advantages to utilizing on demand.
Right.
But we also have the ability for them to phone in on a landline to book through our dispatchers or email us ahead of time. Which is very convenient for a lot of our employees that work in the industrial park who get their schedule 2 weeks at a time. They can email that in, we enter it into the system, and then send them back a confirmation email that they're booked so that they're comfortable and that we're going to be there when we need them.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly kind of what I was thinking. So okay, so we'll start to wrap things up. I was hoping just before we close things out, maybe I could get quick 30 seconds from each of you, just what you think is the most important thing to consider when adopting on-demand transit. So I'll go kind of around the way you guys are on my screen, and we'll start with Hamish.
The most important thing to consider, geez, so many things to consider. My advice to agencies and folks looking to do this is just to try it and be open to, don't get caught up in paralysis through analysis. So you can plan till the cows come home, but obviously you want to scope things, you want to plan things to some extent, but trying and doing and learning through doing and piloting. Look at Paul's experience. He had a wildly successful pilot. I think, doing is really the best way to learn and the best way to experiment. And that would be my number one thought, I guess.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Aryan next.
Yeah, sure. I would also concur with what Hamish was saying there, but I think another important thing to evaluate or to consider, I think that is all coming up at this time, is the focus is, I think, more shifting from operational parameters to customer-focused parameters.
Mhm.
So I think, for example, consider like as we discussed, what are your wait times? What coverage that you can provide? How many people can really get to their jobs? I think becomes more important than just saying, hey, we're on time. And I think combined with like evaluating that on productivity and operational parameters, I think it's important to consider also how many people can really get to their destination reasonably with the service that you're providing, because at certain places in the past, mode share was only like 5%. That basically means that 95% of people could not get to their destination. And I think what this COVID situation forced us to do was probably saying, like, how can we make sure that maybe 95% of the people can get to their destination with a more flexible service level? And I think that will change thinking a lot in how we design systems.
Great. Yeah. And I think, that's a shift you hear constantly about the post-COVID thinking, right? So I think it's very, very appropriate and very top of mind. So thank you. And we'll finish up with Paul.
Absolutely. I concur with both other panelists, and I would say that know what you want the service to do for you. Don't try and drive the service. Just know what you want and what it can do. And my biggest piece of advice would be go visit a service that is operating and running. Come visit us in Belleville. Get in touch with Sault Ste Marie or anybody that's using it, and go see it and physically use it so that you have a great understanding in how it works. And from our experience, be ready for more people than you anticipated.
Right.
We were very pleasantly surprised that way.
Great. Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. I think this was great. Hopefully we've given everyone on the call some different ways to think about things. If you're thinking about implementing on demand, thinking about how can we do that, what practical things we kind of really need to think about tackling and everything like that. Thank you very much, especially to you, our panelists, Hamish, Ariane, and Paul, for all your thoughts today in the presentations. We really appreciate it. So thank you everyone who is joining. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.